Okay, we're recording just my face, so you guys don't have to worry about being on screen or anything like that. Today we're going to be presenting on the philosophy of miracles. So anything you guys heard about this topic so far?
The philosophy of miracles?
Yeah, so we'll get into it, but a lot of times in the discussion sphere online, you'll hear the claim that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence or something like that. And don't get me wrong, I sympathize with the idea that the more spectacular the claim, the more evidence that's needed to ascertain to it. But the idea that the miracle is inherently the most improbable event just doesn't bear for many philosophical reasons. So that's basically what we're going to be discussing today about. Because you'll hear from, like, say, Dr. Earman that you can't say that the resurrection happened because by definition, the resurrection is the most improbable event. And what historians do is try to ascertain to the most probable event. So that's basically what we're going to be talking about. Any other questions? No? All right. Yeah, well, so we're going to be presenting on David Hume's arguments and critiques against his arguments. So David Hume is well known for creating this maximum that there's no amount of testimony that can ascertain to a miracle. So how did this all start? Well, actually, we'll have an overview of today's presentation. We'll go over the origin of David Hume's essay and his hatred for organized religion. We'll even go a little bit over why his intellectual laziness doesn't come to par with his contemporaries of the time that did develop probability calculus to combat the idea that you can ascertain to rare events, because epistemically, miracles are no different from rare events. It's just the fact that miracles ascertain to this quote-unquote supernatural. But anywho, then we're going to see how the rediscovery of Hume's maxim comes to a lot of these online discussions. We're going to discuss what does it mean for a miracle to occur, the definition of miracles, eyewitness testimony as evidence, what is the nature of claims and evidence with regards to miracle claims. We'll be taking a look at the parable of the Indian prince, aka the king of Siam, mentioned by Newton, or was it Locke? Yeah, I think it was Locke. Naive induction, Reichenbach's straight rule. We're going to take a look at how you have to make good categorical assumptions in order to assess very complex problems like this correctly. We're going to take a brief look at probability theory, Bayesianism, multiply attested eyewitness testimony, and a balanced view of Hume's lasting contributions. Any questions so far? All good? All good? All right. David Hume's origin story, his hatred for organized religion. So, David Hume was a philosopher that grew up during the Enlightenment period, which is characterized by distrust for authoritarian regimes, and as a result, the church was also distrusted. He's best characterized as an Enlightenment atheist, although the proper term during that time was to say you're irreligious, so to speak. There are many Hume scholars that document his views, and it is well researched. And I just have a quote over here that describes how much he has a disdain for organized religion. Vulgar superstition is the word that he used to describe religious claims. Faction civil wars, persecutions, subversions of government. He all blames it on the mind behind religion.
Sounds a lot like what's his name? Christopher Hitchens.
Yeah, the new atheist. So for context, Christopher Hitchens was a new atheist who did parade this idea that if you got rid of religion, you would create a utopic society. But as we all see, even though we have an increase of quote-unquote nuns in the religious atmosphere of, like, the platter of worldviews, society has clearly not improved all that much in its ability to critically think. Yeah, so good mention over there with Christopher Hitchens. The origin of Hume's miracle essay. So he basically was in conversation with a Jesuit, and the Jesuit said that, oh yeah, there's some miracle performed in their convent. And so he began to organize a lot of topics for his treatise against miracles. And this below over here is just the lineage of proposed essays that he developed that finally led to the inquiry of miracles. Hume's intellectual laziness. So this does have to be mentioned because, you hear someone like Matt Dillahunty say that Hume is the father of skepticism, and to be honest, for his compared to his contemporary intellectuals, he was just he was an abject failure, as John Earman would put it. There's no reason for him not to respond to the robust probability calculuses that are developed to ascertain to miracle claims and or rare events. So figures like Richard Price, Thomas Bayes, these are all pretty renowned people, intellectuals in Great Britain around the same time. Others include Sherlock, Peirce, Chandler, Jackson, and West. I just added Coward over there just for humor. The rediscovery of Hume's maxim. All right, just as I'm saying, you hear this a lot in the online sphere. Skeptics say that any naturalistic hypothesis is more plausible than a supernatural event, no matter how improbable. And so a miracle by assumed definition is the most improbable event. And towards the end of part 1 of his inquiry, Hume announces a general maxim that no testimony is sufficient to establish a miracle. The superior only remains after deducing the inferior. So basically the idea is that the only way a testimony for a miracle can be good is if that miracle can become like a law-like generalization. And we'll see for several reasons that it just doesn't work like that, right? I don't need a ridiculous amount of testimony to say that I won the lottery, although the lottery is inherently a rare event. So we'll take a look at things like that. So contemporary resurrection debates. Here's a video by Kyle Bailey where Dr. Ehrman says the same thing. He basically posits a very implausible theory that the disciples stole the body of Jesus, resulting in the empty tomb. And we'll go over in our next presentation, where me and Will will tag team to present on the resurrection for Jesus. We'll see that that's also a very improbable hypothesis. But we're not going to go over the video. That's just basically what Dr. Ehrman says in many of his contemporary debates. Even the 5-hour debate he did with Michael Kona last year, he still says the same thing. And we'll see that historians should not do philosophy. Conceptions of miracles, definitions used by critics and their contemporaries. Aquinas says that miracles violate nature. Spinoza says that miracles are evidence that God acted against his own nature. Now, the definition that we will take will be one that Locke espoused to, that it is a sensible operation contrary to the established course of nature and taken to be divine. That is to say that a miracle is like catching a phone while it is falling. You're not violating the law of gravity as it is falling, rather that you're putting an agent and having its effect feed into the system. And so, we have no reason to espouse to these other definitions of miracles. Anyway, that's not the theistic understanding of miracles, that they quote-unquote violate nature, that they violate God's decrees. This bottom line over here confuses epistemic versus ontic quality of miracles. Epistemic means being able to ascertain reasonably to in terms of belief. Ontic means by very nature. And so what Hume has a very hard time understanding is that for miracles, there's a difference from being able to ascertain to them in terms of belief versus the very nature of them. Just labeling it supernatural doesn't make it even more improbable. Critiquing Enlightenment critics. So Hume appeals to uniform experience, but many different uniform experiences have contradicted each other. So he'll say, well, if your experience of a miracle contradicts reality, which is attested to by uniform experience, then it probably didn't happen. But the problem is that uniform experience, quote unquote, has to be defined correctly. All humans across time, for example, have believed all sorts of things. Some of them do even believe in the existence of miracles. And as we were saying earlier, laws consider that laws have a natural necessity operator. Hume doesn't provide a method to distinguish these and just blankets them as all, quote unquote, impossible. Does making a sandwich violate the second law of thermodynamics? Yeah, that's funny. George Campbell complained that laws of nature, like miracles, are testimonial. So the parable of the Indian prince is an interesting one. It basically goes over this Indian prince, or the king of Siam in the case of Locke, that here's testimony from a traveler who comes from a distant land that says, hey, I found this thing called ice, and it's basically solid water. And at first glance, he says, yeah, there's no way that water can just transform into anything solid. And then more evidence piles up and piles up and piles up till the point where he finally acknowledges the existence of ice. So the point is, at no point does the Indian prince take all of India to go visit this North Pole or like winter-like place to say, hey guys, ice is real, touch it, take photographs of it. You know, at some point, the testimony of distant travelers will overcome the epistemic need to ascertain to belief in ice. Same thing with outer space. George Campbell also made this critique that laws of nature are built off of individual testimonies. And as for the cause of miracles, so you also hear this accusation in the online sphere that, well, even if the resurrection of Jesus happened, we can't know what the cause of it is. And so for Locke and the Newtonians, they knew better. Miracles gained their religious force from their combination with prophecy, from their timing and coincidence. So it's not just the miracle you have to explain, it's also the cause of the guy who was able to predict it. So in the case of Jesus, you have to explain where he got the supernatural ability to predict his resurrection. And just for like an anecdotal example, we can guess someone passed a perfect GRE by cheating, but if someone predicted it beforehand, then we have good reason to investigate that single hypothesis and increase its probability, that a hypothesis alone, that he got a perfect GRE through cheating, probably because his friend knows his cheating methods or something like that, and not necessarily because he's like a super genius. Easter egg video. All right, let's go, baby. All right. So I actually made a video on this. It's a little bit quick. So YouTube has this thing where like shorts can only be like 1 minute. So yeah, I basically try to describe that one truth that yes, we can ascertain to the cause of miracles. Uh-oh. Hold up. Yeah, Wi-Fi. My bad.
Like Matthew, I talked about the Indian prince.
Yeah.
Like, a historical, I think, applicable to that is like scientific revolution, when people found out that Earth wasn't the center of the solar system, because people were actually killed for that, and even Galileo didn't have his essay published until after he died, because he knew if he would publish when he was alive, he would kill him. And so, like a lot of people in the church, when people said, "Hey, we're actually not the center of the universe," or that's the sun is.
And at no point did like everyone like go to outer space, right?
Yeah.
Like testimony does qualify as evidence.
Yeah.
It's just obvious that it does. Yeah. And we'll see later on that's actually the basis of scientific inquiry. Proves God rose Jesus, not aliens, using philosophy and formal logic. All right. I'm probably gonna have to take this out of YouTube, but here it is.
Happy to be shown that I'm wrong. Can we define supernatural?
A miracle is a sensible operation contrary to the established course of nature and taken to be divine. having a godlike cause.
Wow, we don't know of any natural
Easy.
explanation for this. Unconvinced by proposed natural explanations, therefore I am justified in claiming that it's supernatural.
Especially when you have Jesus
switched out the
claiming
persons.
that he's God's uniquely divine Son and predicts his resurrection from the dead.
In short, the PSR is the metaphysical principle that every fact
Yeah.
has an explanation, that is, a sufficient reason.
Yeah, the PSR is just basically saying you need a reason for everything.
Cause for how Jesus could have predicted this, admitting he had special knowledge, and if he claims that God will raise him from the dead, then he knew God raised him
Super
from
hot
the dead.
fire. Yeah. That's Easter egg number 1. We have 2 more of those to go. From Kern's side. Yeah, he actually made some new videos. Dejan Raw on the whole super hot fire meme. All evidence relates to testimony. Multiply attested and supported claims qualifying as evidence. So yeah, as we were talking about before, the Indian prince hears about this traveler talking about ice, and then more travelers come and testify to the existence of ice. And then the question becomes, what kind of testimony can overturn uniform experience? Because clearly, at no point does the Indian prince take everyone to the North Pole to prove the existence of ice, or we take the word of astronauts, and it's not just like, oh yeah, like outer space exists. No, they're like, we take their testimonies and the testimonies that they actually were out of the far reaches of the atmosphere and collected some rocks, moon rocks. Personal experience and derived experience based on testimony, we said the same thing. Most of inductive inferences are based on a mixture of the two. Hume's maxim disproves the resurrection, but it also disproves ice, proton decay, and outer space sarcasm. Collective experience argument does not work unless it uses other types of testimonial evidence. The straight rule of induction. The rule. So basically, this one basically says that it's just like, think about, like, if you were like, in layman's terms, the best way I can describe this is like, if you're like a baby and then you see enough times that you put something in the sky and then it drops, you're going to assume something like the law of gravity. But in the case of like the resurrection, you have to get the reference class correct. And we'll look at this later, like, say for example, what kind of physics law says that people can't rise from the dead? Well, clearly we have medical resuscitation, so there's no such physical law that says that people can't rise from the dead. Oh, no. The physical law is people can't rise from the dead unless they have some medical assistance. Okay, well, how is God rising someone from the dead categorically different from medical assistance? Yeah, exactly.
It's like the most.
Yeah, like
It's
it.
like the best type of medical assistance.
Yeah, exactly. And so, like, there's nothing, like, in terms of, like, law-like generalizations that would make us assume that there are no reasons to epistemically ascertain to belief in the resurrection. Yeah. So, miracles are supernatural / impossible, whereas extraordinary events are natural / possible, according to Peter Annett. So, just to keep in mind, supernatural is it is synonymous with impossible, whereas extraordinary events are synonymous with natural / possible. Well, I mean, then the question becomes like, can you conclude anything new? If everything that doesn't fit your prior worldview is quote unquote impossible or supernatural, can you reasonably come up with anything new? This is totally against what science stands for, coming up with new theories to better explain the world. And so Anna seems to be saying that naive induction, just saying that, oh, as long as it doesn't fit my prior worldview, there's no way it can be true. Naive induction by enumeration works, or nothing does. And Hume's view, as we will see below, it's not much more sophisticated. It's repetitive, based off of predecessors. And if you're a baby who knows nothing, if you have no predecessors, if you just obey this weird law that you can't ascertain to believe in anything unless it fits your prior worldview, then you can conclude absolutely nothing. Yeah, this is just another quote from David Hume, basically describing his maxim: no testimony for any kind of miracle can ever possibly amount to probability, much less to a proof. Another Easter egg video. So just for context, this video is supposed to say that if you're going to say that you can't ascertain to new beliefs, then you cannot conclude anything. But I tried to do that all in 1 minute, so it's probably going to, the message is not going to go across. Here we go. The title, grave news.
I'm happy to be shown that I'm wrong. I tell you 10 things and 8 of them are correct. It tells you nothing at all about whether the other 2 are correct.
Sometimes it does.
No, it absolutely does not. It cannot.
Yeah, what about in the case of gravity?
The stone close to the floor, sometimes, many times. Then we generalize and that's induction.
Hillbilly dilly, you understand that your sloppy phrases is what allows us to smuggle in things, but don't seem to grasp that these are part of the same story.
My accent is so bad.
The scope of reliability is extended to the same author. If an effect is reliable, we can retrospectively infer a greater probability for the reliability of the cause. If you took your idea seriously, you would be stuck in the abyss of zero knowledge.
That slap didn't age too well. Get it? Because Chris Rock was slapped. Oh man, okay. Alright, current slide. Categorical assumptions. Reference class is crucial in statistics. So on the thought experiment, we were discussing it earlier. There's no law of physics that says that humans cannot rise from the dead. And could it be the case that there are both natural atoms that are coming together to give the dead corpse of Jesus life, but also supernatural guidance, both natural and supernatural components? What does it mean to be naturally resurrecting and supernaturally resurrecting? What defines natural from supernatural? Epistemically, right? Just because they're different by nature, or the results of their conclusion, doesn't mean that we can't ascertain to them actually happening. It just means that you're going to have to accept that God exists at the end of accepting that Jesus rose from the dead. Yeah, to illustrate the underlying categorical assumptions in our inquiry, take for example the following problems. The doomsday problem. What is the probability that the world as we know it will end? Well, David Hume would probably say something along the lines of, at least using his line of reasoning, well, humanity has never ended, therefore humanity will never end. Same thing with the resurrection. People stay dead, therefore people can never rise. Same thing with the sunrise problem. What is the probability that the sun will rise tomorrow? Well, the sun has always risen, so therefore it'll never expand into supernova and blow up. Yeah, and the problem with this is that you're just asking the wrong question. You shouldn't be asking how many times has the sun risen with respect to all of the days that have transpired. You should be asking something along the lines of what is the probability of the sun expanding given the celestial orbit, given what we know about the age of stars, given the direction humanity is headed, and so on and so forth. You need the right reference class. You need the right question frame the probability in a right manner to ascertain to the good probability. Same thing with lottery tickets. You don't say that, oh, well, no one wins the lottery, therefore if someone told me they won the lottery and showed me the ticket, I'm never going to believe it. That's just very wrong-headed. So as we have seen, closed naive induction will reason that humanity will never end because it has never ended, or that the sun will forever rise because it has always risen. Not to say that you should, wake up thinking that maybe the sun won't rise tomorrow, but you just have to ask the right questions is basically what it amounts to. Probability theory, Bayesianism. Given that in n trials m of the outcomes are b, hold up. It's amusing to note in passing that the Bayes rule for assigning prior probabilities makes the existence of Hume miracles a certainty. So basically what that means is that if you're going to assume that there is an inherent prior probability to something like the resurrection, albeit like under a statistical framework, basically what it amounts to is that you can never assign that probability 0. The possibility of miracles is a certainty. It's not to say that every miracle happens or every miracle claim should be taken seriously, but what it does mean is that their mere possibility is a certainty. And these are the two equations that he derives that conclusion on the left-hand side. Bayesian probability. So the probability that the hypothesis is true given the evidence and the background knowledge. Background knowledge refers to the probability of events happening by nature, and evidence refers to evidence for that specific event in time, is equal to probability of the hypothesis given the background knowledge times probability of evidence given the background knowledge and the hypothesis divided by probability of evidence divided by the hypothesis. TLDR, you have to take both the evidence for that specific event and the background knowledge both into account when assessing miracle claims. Denial of possibility of miracles is to deny science. Hume's appeal to the straight rule of closed induction, namely that if we can't ever observe it, it'll never happen, is both descriptively inadequate to actual scientific practice, and it is stultifying to scientific inquiry. Among the zillions of protons observed by particle physicists, none have been verified to decay, but particle physicists do not assign a probability of 1 to the proposition that the next proton to be observed will not decay, right? So basically what this is saying is that particle physicists do acknowledge that there's such a thing called atomic decay, and just because it never happened doesn't mean that there aren't like quarks, like I believe that's the right subatomic particle for proton decay, like trying to exit out of the proton or something like that. I could be very wrong on that. The only kind of decay I know at the subatomic level is like radioactive decay when it comes to like the isotopes and like the actual element, but that's just physics. But the point is that there's a theoretical underpinning of like particle physics, and no one has actually observed the actual decay, although it does happen. Further evidence would be waved away by naive induction. So that basically says that under Hume's understanding of miracles can never happen, if we were to take that logic very seriously, we would just be resulting in never being able to accept any amount of evidence to ascertain to the resurrection, which intuitively doesn't sound correct. There has to be some sort of limit that makes us finally say, okay, yeah, fine, the resurrection happened. Yeah. Probability theory, multiple attestation through eyewitness testimony, a chain of reliability. So this is just to address the idea that, you need like, if there's a chain of reliability, like say for example manuscripts or like witnesses dependent on witnesses, there's going to be this weird diminution principle that says that they're going to be decreasing the more dependent they get. But the fact of the matter is, as long as all of them or most of them are telling truthfulness most of the time, then that's just simply not the case. Say 90% of two witnesses being truthful, 90 times 90 equals 81%. Oh yeah, like if you keep doing 90%, then it's going to eventually diminuate to something less. Well, mathematically, this is just false because, take for example 10%, the falsity of those witnesses. So 10% times 10% is 1% that the claim is false. And then the question therefore becomes, can we ascertain access to independent first-hand eyewitnesses? Is really the question that we should be asking. Because intuitively it makes sense that the possibility of the resurrection is indirectly influenced by the actual event of guards at the tomb, not necessarily saying, whether or not this account in Matthew is historical, or this one archaeological dig of the Nazarene inscription of people guarding tombs originates from Nazareth. So basically, TLDR. There's in statistics, this idea of like a chain of reliability is just busted. Probability and multiple eyewitnesses. So this is the one thing I'm just not going to go over the math. So basically, Thomas Bayes and Richard Price. I think it's mostly Richard Price. He goes through like this crazy math, taking the assumptions of Bayesian statistics that says if independent witnesses can be found who speak truth more frequently than falsehood, it is always possible to assign a number of independent witnesses. The improbability of the falsehood of whose concurring testimony shall be greater than the improbability of the miracle itself, as long as they are credible witnesses, as they witness to the same/similar category. TLDR, Hume's idea that he finally disproved miracles for good is just very wrong. Contrary false miracles. This is another objection that Hume brings up. There are miracle claims that contradict each other, or at least ascertain to contradictory religions. And basically he just lists out this math that, in theory, there could be one religion that stands out with a super miracle, aka in our case it's Christianity and the resurrection. And even though it's contradictory to all these religions, there's nothing that prevents the possibility of all these religions being false and Christianity being true, so long as there is good evidence that stands out against these false religions. Hume's lasting contributions. What did Hume get right at the end of the day, anyway? Because we've blasted him for quote unquote developing this argument to finally disprove miracles for good, which, to be fair, he does claim that. So we kind of are going hard on him. The religious significance that forwards biased dispositions make the testimonial evidence of lesser quality. Basically what this means is that if there's any reason for people to be biased towards their miracle claim, then it makes it of lesser probability. And so to illustrate this, does a man of sense run after every silly tale of witches or hobgoblins or fairies? Blah, 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 blah. And as we will see, that is not the case at all with the disciples. The disciples were distressed, were confused. They didn't understand why their leader had to be crucified. In their minds, they were waiting for a political Messiah to overthrow the Romans and usher in peace in Jerusalem and all of Judea. And so, in other words, they weren't predicting a resurrection. And we'll see that in our presentation later. The eschatological understanding of most Jews at that time, and I say most Jews because Jews aren't a monolith. Many different Jews thought different things, but most Jews generally thought that everyone will be raised from the dead at the same time. And so for Jesus to be risen from the dead first, before any of them else, kind of doesn't fit their eschatological model. But pretty interesting discussion. Besides that, he doesn't contribute nothing. He doesn't contribute anything substantial, to be honest. Contrary to false miracles, they lack cognitive significance. That's no different than saying, I don't get it. So yeah, I'm basically taking this all from John Earman's paper, Hume's Abject Failure. That's basically what I'm responding to. John Earman gives he has a section on possible fallback positions Hume can take. And here I am rebutting to some of those fallback positions. They can also suppose that since the various religions of the world have incompatible doctrines at their cores, goes back to the idea of false miracles or false religions going against false religions, and then you're going to have to assume yours is true, which is totally fine in my case. I mean, I encourage people to look at Joseph Smith's account to the eyewitnesses to the golden tablets. It's nothing like the resurrection, 500 plus people attesting to a crucified Messiah, and now he's risen, and there is an empty tomb. And by the way, the leaders at that time couldn't falsify the empty tomb, and they still acknowledge the reality of the empty tomb. And we also have that from other sources, just besides Matthew's Gospel. Say, for example, I think it's Justin Martyr's dialogue with Trypho. He basically says, yeah, we found the tomb empty, and I guess Jesus' disciples stole the body. And we'll see that doesn't make sense given their natural dispositions to would be against the idea that to risk their lives for the resurrection would be putting themselves in danger. So yeah, I just encourage everyone to look at counterfeit miracles like Jim Jones' cult. The dude was a faith healer, but he didn't rise from the dead. Branch Davidians, Heaven's Gate, I believe those are the same thing. So yeah, actually decent fallback positions. A resurrection can't justify religion. We already rebutted that idea that the Newtonian understanding of prophetic prediction justifying knowledge of the agent wrecks this notion, namely that you can't just say, oh yeah, there's a cause for the miracle. You have to explain the cause for Jesus' knowledge that the miracle will happen, namely the resurrection. And if he has supernatural knowledge, then we should take him at his word, namely that a God exists, the God of the Israelites. Why should we assume that a volition of the deity is localizable to the spatio-temporal nexus? This is just questioning, if we're talking about an all-powerful God, why would we believe he obeys a law of cause and effect? And then the obvious objection would be, why wouldn't he? I mean, if there's a God of this universe that is producing effects, why wouldn't we believe in him? In other words, if an all-powerful God chooses to reveal himself in the universe and produces an effect, a miraculous effect like the resurrection, we ought to believe in him. Need to rule out every other possibility, but the atheist rules out a brain in a vat using the null hypothesis. The null hypothesis basically is a technical term in philosophy that says that most claims in metaphysical space are false, and so so something like, oh yeah, my brain's actually in a laboratory and people are experimenting on it to create this simulated version of the universe. Atheists will rule that out, saying the null hypothesis. But yet when it comes to the resurrection, they say, oh no, you can't use the null hypothesis. You have to disprove every natural theory. which doesn't make sense, because if you yourself cannot provide a good natural explanation for the resurrection, then I'm not the one who should be looking out for, weird naturalistic possibilities, Yeah, and we talked about how the lines between natural and supernatural are a little bit blurred. And Easter egg video. Do you guys want to see this one? It's up to you guys. Okay. The process of elimination. My bad. Oops. Oof. Yeah, this is one. Yeah, like the thing is, like with YouTube, they let you only do shorts for like 1 minute long. So I try to condense that whole argument to 1 minute. So it's really funny how it turns out, because like it's just a lot of fast talking that barely conveys the truth.
Happy to be shown that I'm wrong. Fallacy called the argument from personal incredulity. I can't think of a better explanation, therefore this one prevails. That is fallacious.
Possibilities and reality. In my position, I can't distinguish whether the reality I experience is an ultimate reality.
We have no good reason to think that absolute certainty in the ultimate sense is possible to attain.
A key strategy is the process of elimination.
I reckon you know that door definition is true.
My accent is so bad.
Already refutes your notion of Dole's fallacy. Only a handful of
Stack from computer science.
Possibilities concerning alternatives to Jesus' resurrection are relevant in the investigation. I'd say the greater miracle to Jesus' resurrection is the neo-atheistic tumor that has infected you in like-minded families.
Oh man. Apollos was my screen name on YouTube. So yeah, in future research, I'd be interested in seeing more robust assessment of the mathematical models pertaining to, reference class forecasting, Laplace's rule of succession, additive smoothing, degrees of rational belief, the idea that, belief ought to be expressed in how much commitment you put into that belief, at least in terms of investigation epistemically, as opposed to I believe versus I don't believe. There's like the whole spectrum is basically those models I'd be interested in for mathematical analysis. And also belief changes, assuming a starting worldview. So basically I took all of these arguments from John Earman, who basically wrote this paper called Hume's Abject Failure. He's not a Christian, and yet he says that, this whole idea that Hume came up with this grand argument that disproved all miracles for all time is just really bad. He calls it an abject failure. He uses really nasty adjectives to describe his work. So I'd be interested to see what kind of critics John Earman himself had. Craig Keener's 2-volume work on medically documented reports of miracles, and better illustrations/examples are always welcome. But yeah, thanks for watching, guys. This is me signing out.